What makes a Pokemon a dragon? It's kind of a broad and open-ended question, but we're in luck because within the logical framework presented by official Pokemon games and materials, Pokemon have types that determine their elemental affinities and types in battle, and Dragon just happens to be one of them. Dragon type is a specific, elemental distinction in this world, and the creatures with it are subject to exact on-paper strengths and weaknesses. They are weak to ice, fairy, and dragon type moves, and they resist fire, water, grass, and electric type moves. So it's actually simple then. Any Pokemon with this quality is by definition a dragon. Alright, case closed. Well, wait a minute. Okay, how do I explain this then? Surely a palm tree is not a dragon. I know it has the type, but that's just not a dragon. Or on the other side of things, you're telling me that the winged, fire-breathing dragon isn't a dragon? This also doesn't really make any sense. The question is ultimately an actually pretty difficult one, but not in the way that it's a hard riddle, or you have to possess an extremely high intelligence to understand dragon Pokemon, but rather because it's sort of a confrontational one. It seems like the games themselves are pitting two different schools of thought against each other. One is that a dragon is some immutable quality that exists in encyclopedias like the Pokédex as an official typing distinction, and then another that dragons are a certain class of creature. They are dragons because they look and behave a certain way, and a Pokemon is draconic based on the actual physical features it has as a species. That first school of thought is foundationally pushed by the mechanics of the games as previously described, but the second is pushed by the series' world building and lore. Dragon Masters like Lance or Iris are notable for using a number of Pokemon on their main battle teams that are lacking their signature type. Pokemon like Aerodactyl, Gyarados, or Archeops will be employed by these legends using dragon moves or embodying draconic traits in some form, despite lacking that official designation. And these are the demonstrated, most prominent experts in the field. Not only do I trust these characters based on the distinctions that they've studied their entire lives, but these Pokemon also just look like dragons. It's pretty simple. They are visually and behaviorally similar to the mythological dragons described in classical folklore. There are different types of dragons as there are different schools of mythology, but at a certain point, if it looks enough like a dragon, what exactly is keeping it from being so? And so ultimately, I do not think there is a singular answer to this question. Not only do we have this divide between the two philosophies on what makes a dragon, but at this point there are so many Pokemon, and resultantly so many edge cases and creatures that exist somewhere sort of in the middle. It just doesn't seem like there's a way to exactly describe a dragon in this context. But even so, there's this undeniable driving force in my head to try and define them anyways. It's like the game wants me to. I'm an analyst at heart and have remained hellbent on answering this question. It's mainly because there's that self-imposed dichotomy. It's like they're goading you into pondering a riddle with no singular answer. And it's something I've pondered off and on for the greater part of a decade, until I recently came across an unusual breakthrough. Presenting the sandwich alignment chart. I know. Where are we going with this? But please bear with me. While not without flaw, this chart was designed to solve a question similar enough to our own: what constitutes a sandwich as a food item? In response to assertions that things like hot dogs are sandwiches. And they very well might be. Draw your own conclusions. This is a video about dragons. What's so attractive to me about this chart is that it's finely divided along a basis of personal philosophy, with lots of wiggle room in the middle. It is very non-absolute. It is divided along two central axes that allow the user to personally decide what's important to them. In this case, asking how one feels about structure and ingredients, and then allowing the user to matrix their two separate opinions into one distinct conclusion about what exactly a sandwich means to them. It's an extremely articulated personal opinion on a number of meaningful points of basis, which is why I think it's the perfect logical structure for dealing with our dragon problem. It seems like Pokemon themselves don't want to put the question to an exact answer, and instead float a number of different philosophies on the subject for players to ultimately draw their own conclusions. And in order to service this slightly more sophisticated perspective, I present the Pokemon Dragon alignment chart. See? We got there. In order to more carefully answer what makes a Pokemon a dragon, we can assess along the axes of dragon logistics as to whether or not a Pokemon is officially a dragon type or uses dragon type moves, and then the axes of draconic structure, whether or not a Pokemon looks like a dragon from Folklore and demonstrates similar draconic qualities, with each axis having a 3-point sliding scale as pictured on screen. And now that there aren't a bunch of sandwiches on screen, we can make the most of this 3x3 grid and further matrix it with today's Pokédoku puzzle, of which I had the pleasure of being the author of. Thanks for having me, Pokidoku. You lovely folks should go check out their puzzle. So as we describe the answers and examples found within the alignment chart, I'll also be picking one prime example that will serve as my official answer for the puzzle. So let's just start from the top, right? Aha, I laughed to myself, because I would actually prefer top left. This is a philosophy of logistic and structural purity, where to be a dragon, a Pokemon must be a dragon type and look like a dragon of folklore. Truthfully, this is a very easy and borderline simple answer to the question. I can't say it doesn't make sense. Pokemon like Rayquaza, Dragonite, or Flygon that do both of these things are so demonstrably dragons that there's virtually no way to argue against them. And even further, I can't really even imagine anyone who would. Pokemon within this criteria are your dragons. But as a classification, this level of purity is borderline unhelpful because of how rigid and scarce it is. There are currently 78 different dragon types, and a single-digit number of them are coming to mind for Pokemon that are assuredly, without a shadow of a doubt, fitting into this criteria. And of course, that's being hyper stringent and baseline about it, but you have to be when you're being a taxonomical purist. A philosophy like this leaves absolutely no wiggle room. It does at least establish something of a bottom line. These Pokemon are absolutely dragons. But again, we're not looking for examples. We're looking for an effective set of rules that can apply at a larger scale. My pick of the litter for this square is definitely Dragonite though. I mean, it's in the name, after all. This is the original dragon's dragon, and every dragon that came after it had to live up to the example it set. And also it's awesome and cute, so I really like it. Moving out of absolute purity, I have made the middle column out to be capable of using dragon type moves. I initially struggled to find a proper middle ground for the logistic detail of being a dragon type, but I think move pools actually make a lot of sense here, as in this case, it's like being able to call upon a draconic energy of sorts. Surely something dragon must be going on if the user can fire a beam of elemental dragon energy or harness that same power in a slashing attack of sorts, even if that Pokemon isn't strictly a dragon type itself. So this combination in top middle feels much more reasonable as a line for judgment, because now we're roping in those edge cases like Aerodactyl and Gyarados. These Pokemon that have that immediately obvious dragon shape and are only lacking the official label of the type. Of course, all those Pokemon count inside of this alignment as well, but here there's so much more meaningful wiggle room that also lines up with the descriptions of the in-game Dragon Masters. This more open-ended classification also opens itself up to ideas like a draconic ancestry, and the thought that certain Pokemon are descended from more true dragons, and while they have lost their official typing, they retain aspects of that physical form and the ability to do dragon things. There are even edge cases within the edge cases thanks to phenomena like Mega Evolution. Sceptile and Charizard are both at least ambivalently in the shaped like a dragon container, but only have the actual typing in their powered up forms. So what's to be said for how dragon the two of them are? They're safely so in a category like this one, but way less in the absolute purist camp. Charizard is kind of the poster child of the odd, not a dragon Pokemon. It is exactly described in this alignment, so we'll be taking it as our example for the official grid. Further widening that lens, we have the no logistic requirement column on the right side of the grid. Maybe it's not complete dragon anarchy, but who says any elemental distinction is required for a Pokemon to be a dragon as long as you look or act like one? This combo in top right much less adds a bunch of new options to the fold, and is rather more of a thought experiment along those lines. How much do the Pokemon categories themselves matter as long as something looks like a dragon? Gliscor, for instance, that's my puzzle guy by the way, has no on-paper dragon qualities, period. Ground and flying type, and not even a dragon move to its name for 5 generations of existence. Which is all completely fair as disclaimers, but I'm also kind of in the camp of like, oh my god, who cares? That kind of looks like a dragon. This logic is certainly prone to its own types of problems though. Like Furret, for instance, could technically kind of qualify along these lines. Sweet, precious Furret. Long serpentine body, whiskers on the face, 4 short little limbs along that body. In a certain light, it's the spitting image of the dragon from Spirited Away. But try as I might, no. Furret is probably not a dragon at the end of the day. And I think this category screams overcorrection and shows how helpful at least some of that biblical dragon element is for making decisions. So we'll move into the second row, along the axis of structure neutral, where Pokemon have physical draconic qualities, while maybe not exactly looking like the dragons of myth. Huge numbers of Pokemon will just have some features in common with traditional dragons without adhering to the ultra classical form, even those with the official typing, like this middle left square. Pokemon Pokemon like Duraludon, Haxorus, or Kingdra surely cut it as dragons through a modern media lens, but with respect to schools of historic folklore would much likelier be considered some other degree of reptile. This tile in specific directly addresses that big elephant in the room. What does a dragon even look like? Up until this point, I've been trying to stay as textbook as possible with the historic Western and Eastern portrayals, but it would be incredibly foolish to not recognize that in dealing with the physicality of a fictional creature, we have to account for the stylistic changes in their portrayal and public acceptance over time. These are ultimately ancient myths, and have had their definitions pushed and pulled through the tides of cultural and literary movement over the course of hundreds of years. And this issue, while surrounding me with the beauty of the bountiful human existence, might be the biggest problem with the alignment chart. I mean, even more so, it's kind of one of the biggest problems with the dragon question to begin with. How are we to define structure without a strict logical basis for what that structure is? And really, we probably aren't going to. But that's why the chart is more of a start for getting the gears turning. Even without the chart and all this extra nonsense, you're inevitably going to have to make that decision of what physically qualifies as a dragon, and in doing so, deeply sophisticating your point and ability to communicate it. As such, I'm personally going with a structural basis in classical folklore, but things like Godzilla, the mythical Hydra, or even T-Rexes have all been argued for over the years. The only important difference is that they are defined through a class and not just examples. And so off of that note, I'm going to take Tyrantrum for this tile as a perfect example of that modern dragon, and a testament to the evolving design of these creatures over time. The center space of access to dragon moves with some elements of dragon structures throws the doors wide open for interpretation while still being relatively reasonable and definite. Lapras, while seemingly untraditional, is easily awarded the dragon title through this lens with its access to moves like Dragon Dance and Dragon Pulse, and then a reptilian dinosaur-like body, although an aquatic one. Aggron, Yveltal, Crocodile. The list goes on for Pokemon like this with potentially outside the box but still meaningful arguments. With this lax categorization, we're further approaching other pieces of note like egg groups and naming conventions. Like take Dragonair for instance. It's barely evoking dragon with this physical design, but I would be hard pressed to argue with its actual name. The dragon of it all is right there. Dragonair. Perhaps more aptly, Seadra, right? Seadra? It evolves into a dragon type, but it didn't in Gen 1, and clearly something was ultimately meant of the name itself. At least, it would go to show in Gen 2. And then there's the nightmare of egg groups, too. These are the groupings by which different Pokemon species are compatible for breeding. And within the titular dragon egg group, we can find stuff like Seviper, Milotic, Helioptile, Scrafty, even. Egg groups are like a biological inheritance of sorts, and you're telling me this creature is in the mix with all the others? I know. Shock value, right? But the signs are there. It gets a boatload of dragon-type moves and has a number of reptilian qualities, most notably being a spiked tail. So it's inarguable that there isn't something draconic going on here, at least. But whether any of these Pokemon are full dragons or not, I'll leave for you to decide. For my money, I'm gonna take Feraligatr on this square, as I think it's a perfect example of that more modern dragon, and it's also one of the Pokemon that's only gotten more draconic as the generations have gone on, especially as of Legend ZA. And then we have middle right. No logistic qualities, but some draconic features. It sounds nice on paper, but this is where the mayhem really begins. Because like, birds, as a monolith even, kind of fit in here. Sharp claws and talons, the extremely notable dragon ability to fly with wings. It's definitely a technicality worth considering. Reptiles and birds and dragons alike, as it's another proper deconstruction of what this overall category means. If I absolutely had to sort dragons into one of the 5 groups of vertebrates, which would I choose? Where's the line for Pokemon like Staraptor or Meganium? I don't know. It feels like we're entering the wild west of what a dragon can be. But the myths surrounding them are ultimately so vast that inclusions like this can be realistic to a certain extent. Wingless dragons, feathered dragons, these creatures too exist in folklore if you look hard enough. It's also probably worth mentioning with this tile and onward the changes Pokemon have experienced over the generations, with plenty of Pokemon getting more draconic over the years through the addition of dragon moves to their move pools. So no, you're right. Meganium even has a number of dragon moves in its modern learn sets. It can call upon the power. But that wasn't always the case though. Its first 2 generations featured no moves of the type, so we're given an even further access to analyze these creatures along. Their capabilities have changed over time as game constructs. Even though Pokemon does a fantastic job of immersing and creating biology for a lived-in world, asking questions like this one necessitates examining changing game mechanics in addition to the lore and visuals. It's ultimately all in service to the lore, but that lore gets a little weird when Meganium gets the ability to use Outrage like it did between Gens 3 and 4. Does that mean that it was getting more draconic? Or that the Pokemon move tutoring is getting better? Or that some deeper understanding of the Pokemon occurred between games? I'm not sure. And of course, this was almost assuredly along the lines of a mechanical change intended to get more tools into battlers' hands, but it doesn't change the fact that lore was still slightly altered as a result. And because of changes like this, Pokemon are both more and less than actual creatures in some ways when it comes to taking them in as stories. And for this tile, I'm gonna take Yanmega because it's a dragonfly. And you know what? Dragonflies are dragons now. Whatever. I find the bottom left tile maybe the most interesting and important on the entire grid. Dragon typing, but lacking the dragon form or features, and rather having some degree of draconic behavior. Pokemon like Alolan Exeggutor or Mega Ampharos have the official type, but also with a bizarre appearance with respect to that type. You're telling me that a palm tree is a dragon, and that this hairy sheep ram thing is one too? No. By all accounts, surely not. But we would again be hard-pressed to argue with the official type. We know through meta context that both of these Pokemon's dragon revolves around puns on their naming convention. Ampharos' Japanese name can literally translate to electric dragon, and Alolan Exeggutor is getting mileage off of dragon fruit or dracana trees. But in both of these strange cases, we have Pokédex entries referencing dragon blood and the power of the sleeping dragon, which is fascinating because here, of all places, we're getting lore drops like that? Some concept of dragon energy and an even deeper dragon identity in a Pokemon's blood are canon concepts to the documentation on these two. And perhaps even a kernel of some official biology could be discovered someday along these lines. This classification is the strongest piece of evidence to me that there is an actual answer to the dragon question, but that it might just be essentially whatever they say it is. Regardless, this is proof that dragon isn't just a notion or inspiration in Pokemon like it would be in the real world. It's an undeniable elemental building block of this universe. For the puzzle, I'll be taking Guzzlord for this one. I especially don't get this creature as a dragon, but it at least acts like one raising towns and destroying stuff. So the tiles beyond this one are simply dragon anarchy. To exist in these categories is to deconstruct the basic notion itself of what it means to be a dragon. If we were to say that being a dragon merely requires the usage of dragon moves and draconic behaviors, as the middle tile does, I would happily call something like Anomalies a dragon. It's got the dragon move Outrage on level up, and it even flies around all over the place, just like a dragon. But let's get even more heretical with the bottom right. Dragon behaviors, but no typing or moves. Cyndaquil is a dragon even. I mean, it can breathe and control fire, right? That's the dragon thing. It has to be a dragon. But in all seriousness, I think these two tiles once again call to the seeming importance of the dragon energy, or whatever was going on with Mega Ampharos and Alolan Exeggutor. The ability to use dragon moves at all seems to be evidence of something deeper within a Pokemon's DNA, like it's calling on some higher power. It might not be considered a true dragon, but it's certainly flirting with the idea of it. To close us out, I'll take Incineroar for bottom middle. It learns Outrage after all, and can control fire, and then Weavile for bottom right. Ice dragons are a thing, and Weavile controls ice. These are all beyond logical conclusions. And that's the entire chart. Yes, we still don't know exactly what a dragon is, and I again kind of think that's the point, but hopefully we rolled over enough of the particulars that we can make the most informed and articulate decisions possible. I think I would personally land somewhere around these 3 middle tiles based on the input of the in-game experts and the notion of dragon blood and power, but it really is still anyone's guess. There's just so much room for error and exceptions with such a massive question like this, and the subject is just filled with little details and complications that can throw curveballs at any attempted set of rules. But it is a substantive question, and if taken seriously, one we can really get informed on. So, what makes a dragon to you? Let me know what you thought down below, and any other thoughts you had on the video. Thanks again to the kind folks over at Pokedoku. Go check out my dragon puzzle over on their website, and that's all I got for you this time, folks. Like the video, and subscribe to the channel if you enjoyed it, and as always, thanks for watching. I'm surrounded by beauty. Droomish out.